Wuthering Waves is peak gacha, period. There's a reason this has such staying power in the gacha space and giving older games a run for their money. It's even reached a point now where it seemingly just gets better and better as time goes on, where other games may have seen a decline in quality. But I'd be lying if I said the game was anywhere near perfect. In fact, Wuthering Waves has a glaring issue that's currently causing new players to bounce right off of it. I'm Forte, and let's talk about how WuWa's 1.0 content is the weakest part of the game. From the jump, the production that went into the visuals for the game is immediately apparent. But on launch, there was a lot of discourse surrounding the design of characters, with many people just chalking up most of the characters as being passable or just generic. None of the characters look bad per se. The designs were just relatively safe, with most Resonators sporting that techno fantasy look without really standing out from the crowd of games with a similar style at the time. Luckily, there were a few fan favorites among the playable Resonators and the story characters introduced in 1.0. Like Camellia, Scar, or the Supreme Guide King Calcharo. Also, I remember people generally liking Rover, both of them looking sleek and stylish, and when compared to other gacha MCs, they are exceptionally competent. The Rovers just have something particularly striking about them. Everyone loves female Rover, of course, and for male Rover, as a grown man that's comfortable in his identity, I get it. The characters that did resonate.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
With the player base was enough to string us along until Kuro started releasing absolute heat. But that's for another video. Subscribe. The feeling of genericness was also leveled towards the first region, Huanglong. And similar to the characters, Huanglong wasn't anything that we hadn't seen before, but what was there was done well enough. The region was huge and split into sub-regions with different biomes, with areas showing varying degrees of messed up by the world's apocalypse. You have your forests, swamps, deserts, and of course the city of Jinzhou in the center of it all. And I don't want to take away from the areas that do look genuinely amazing, but most are your average fare. But they do look good if nothing else, and I can say that at least. But would you like to know what I have all the hostility for? The story. Like, brother, what were they thinking? I don't really know where to start. The world building concepts that they wanted to dabble in were interesting enough, but the storytelling around them were god awful. To begin, we're introduced to our MC suffering from amnesia, dropped into a world where everyone we meet is overly trusting of us and glazes us to no end. Anyone familiar with gachas has made peace with the fact that this is the standard setup. I'm no exception, and typically this kind of beginning will not deter me from the rest of the game. Unfortunately, a lot of launch players were cursed with the knowledge of knowing that Kuro initially intended to take the 1.0 story in a very different way, with characters not really trusting Rover and reacting in a more negative way to their presence. Beta testers voiced their displeasure with how the cast treated Rover, and the rest is history. The incline in story quality began soon after 1.1, but Kuro had the chance to create a much more memorable and compelling story for new players that might have helped ease some of the pains of another big issue surrounding the story, which was the unending wave of technobabble in terms that the players were just not familiar with. This is a common problem that often pops up when it comes to fantasy and sci-fi stories. Dialogue is front-loaded with names and terms that the creator thinks the audience needs to know, but oftentimes this just leads to us checking out and not really listening to anything that's going on until something happens that snaps us out of it and makes us care again. For all their faults as far as story is involved, many Genshin-like gachas aren't exactly known for their stories, but at worst they're just boring. However, once a story just starts throwing words at the players, it feels worse than boring. Like the game is actively trying to drive the audience away. All this is made even more frustrating considering just how well done the plot is now, with some of the story beats and character arcs being some of the best content I've witnessed in any medium. 2.0 picks up the slack significantly with Renaissita, and I've been genuinely moved by some of the stories being told in 3.0. The 1.0 story is easily at its best when it slows down a bit, and it lets its more interesting characters run the scene. The climax to 1.0 is kinda hype, admittedly, and gives a good reason to stick around with the game and see where it goes. But as it stands, I think the 1.0 story is best experienced reading the summaries before you skip the scene. The Wuthering Waves did and still does have a number of issues. I think its biggest offense on launch was that it just failed to establish a strong identity for itself. Of course, this is going to be a bit more arbitrary, but hear me out. WuWa had many areas that were just good enough, with its combat being the shining star, but a lot of it just felt like slightly different flavors of what Genshin was already offering. The UI didn't try to hide its inspiration. Huanglong didn't stand out too much when compared to the launch Tiamat map, and for a game that's so steeped in musical references and motifs, WuWa's 1.0 soundtrack did not hold a candle to the bangers that Genshin launched with. Luckily, Kuro is in the groove of things now, and WuWa has really found its own path to walk in the gacha space. While most of the launch content is more or less the same, some parts have benefited from recent patches that have improved the experience across the entire game, such as the ability to fly in Huanglong, which is great since it does speed things up in this part of the map. As pretty as it is, it's still the weakest region visually, and there's so many more breathtaking sights to see in Renacida and Lahiroi. All in all, despite some of the roughest edges being sanded over, the launch content does leave a lot to be desired, and it's a shame because it has and will probably continue to be a deterrent for many players who pick up the game, and the content beyond Huanglong is some of the most captivating moments I've ever experienced in gaming. For anyone looking to get into Wuthering Waves, I highly recommend utilizing those skip summaries for the majority of the 1.0 content, and just let the superb gameplay carry you through the experience. Once that 1.1 content rolls around, that rise in quality hits, and before you know it, you'll be hooked as well. And once you are, don't forget to keep up with my videos and join in on the discussions. But until then, this has been Forte, and I'm out.